So, continuing with the themes of alien. Imagine now that the UK government puts an ad in the newspaper that they're looking for volunteers to go and meet aliens. Who's going? Okay, keep that in mind. So I'll show you a short video. If you haven't seen that, it's with Stephen Hawking. I highly recommend that you go, you download it, watch it. So there's two parts to it.
Hello. My name is Stephen Hawking, physicist, cosmologist, and something of a dreamer. Although I cannot move, and I have to speak through a computer, in my mind, I am free.
Free to explore the universe and ask big questions, such as, is time travel possible?
What? This is the wrong...
Can we open up? Or find a shortcut to the future?
This is the one. Sorry about that.
Hello. My name is Stephen Hawking, physicist, cosmologist, and something of a dreamer. Although I cannot move, and I have to speak through a computer, in my mind, I am free.
Free to explore the universe and ask the big questions, such as, do aliens exist? If so, where could they be found? What do they look like? What are they made of? Are they intelligent? And if we met them, what would it mean for humankind?
Keep that in mind.
Themselves.
Just a few more seconds. I cannot show you 40 minutes of the...
So if aliens ever visit us, I think the outcome would be much as when Christopher Columbus first landed in America, which didn't turn out very well for the Native Americans.
So, for all of you who said they will be willing to go, so when the government announced it, you said, many of you raised your hands. Maybe many of you thought that you're going to meet these nice fellows, these nice aliens. But if Stephen is right, you are more likely to meet these guys. But in a sense, this is all about risk-taking, right? Many of you who raise their hands, you don't know what you're going to face. And risk-taking is all about uncertainty and what you're going to face. And we want to know individuals that are willing to take the risk and those of us who are not willing to take the risk. And how can we actually divide that? How many of you have seen the movie Dr. Strangelove? If you have not seen the movie, please leave the room now. Go see it now. In principle, the film, there are many aspects to the film. But those who know a little bit about the film, there's at least one aspect which is the nuclear bomb. There are two essential characters among the many. There are two essential characters. On the left, we have the pilot. This pilot had to go into Russia and drop the bomb. Such a pilot, we want him, or her in this case it was him, we want him to be a risk taker. This is not an easy task. You have to go into foreign territory with missiles. In contrast, this is sort of a madman, but he was the commander responsible for more or less all the planes that are in the air with the nuclear. We want that individual not to be a risk taker. We want him to be conservative, because if he presses the button, it's doomsday. Now, The question is for you. How, you imagine now, you are the HR or whatever for the US military, German military, you name it. You have to classify to know whether the general is a conservative or risk averse, and whether the pilot will be a risk taking. How do you do that? What do you do?
Experiment.
What kind of experiment do you do?
Decision making.
Yes, but think about the tool. What tools would you use?
Money?
Money. What kind of money would you use? What do you have in mind?
Investment. Yeah.
Gambling.
Yeah.
Do you think, that's an interesting question, so you will give them all sorts of gambles. But do you think this will be a good predictor whether somebody will press the button or not?
No, no.
It's a question. It's a question. It's not the answer. Don't be too quick to judge. It's a good maybe beginning. What other thing you might do?
Games.
Games. What kind of games would you give them? Monopoly. I'm not sure what games you have in mind.
Poker?
Poker. But poker seems to me a bit like gambling.
Yeah, that's true.
You're all creative.
Much more like
Sorry?
this kind of kill each other games.
I don't know what is this game.
Me neither.
Call of Duty.
But like paintball assignment. It's
Paintball assignment. What other things?
Business?
Business. It seems to me you're all gravitating towards the money. Nobody even said, how about asking them, are you a risk taker?
Well, we did
This-
once project about promotion credential.
Yeah.
But it was horrible because it's not transporting from one part of the slide to another.
These are the major challenges facing us all the time. Whether it is evaluating pilots, commanders, it doesn't matter what domain we look at in life, we want to understand what drives people risk-taking and how do we measure it. Think about many professions that there are in life, but not only professions. These are the usual suspects. So we are concentrating typically when we think about risk-taking, we think about those aspects. People take drugs, smoking, actually drinking fruit shake or whatever seems to be a risky because it's a lot of sugar, obesity, etc. So how do you evaluate that? Would that be associated with that? There are global risks. Oil spills, poverty, human trafficking, HIV. How do we measure now this? It's fundamentally different than the one looking at individual, whether you will pilot that plane into Russian territory, what used to be Russian territory, or whether you would be involved in HIV in one way or so, unprotected sex. So those are fundamentally different. How about our politician? I don't know how many of you know about those issues that were in the US a couple months ago, maybe a year ago. The Republicans shut down Congress and they didn't want to raise the ceiling. If they didn't raise the ceiling of the deficit or whatever it is, for all intended purposes, the world economy would have endured probably disastrous consequences. Or at least those were the predictions. So those individuals in Congress were highly risk-taker. Although if you might ask them, they might not claim that they are risk-takers. So there are a host of areas and domains where risk-taking is prevalent, and the areas are fundamentally different, and how you might approach it and how you might measure it might be completely different. And this is, as a researcher who is interested in risk-taking, I'm always confronted in this question of how should I go about and actually measure your risk-takers, young people risk-takers, or whatever group that we are interested in. So this is just a brief issues about the challenges. These are some of the jokes. Oh, come on, you only live once, and we only consider everything except the risks. So but if you think about it, this is what my teenager might say, oh, you only live once, you might as well do that. So there is actually a reflection about what it is. So if you look, I'm not so interested now in defining what risk-taking and getting into an argument, oh, this is what risk-taking. Just give you a sense, if you look at the dictionary, this is what you might get about risk-takers. But if you would open more the literature, the psychological, economical, you might face more things about the prospect theory that talks about certain axiom, about expected utility models. We don't have to get into that. Large largely driven by Bernoulli's work about uncertain outcomes. If you look really at the economic literature, a lot of it is about uncertainty in how individuals deal with it in approach. But again, all I want to do is just give you a brief sense of the challenges that I, as a researcher, face. And these are some of the tools that we use. I send you an email with a few of the tools. When you go to the lab, there's an additional tool, a computerized one, that we'll play around with, just to show you what has been around. So, as was mentioned, this is the most common tool being used to evaluate risk-taking, gambles. Some sort of a gamble, whether it is poker, whether it is this. Usually, it is presented in this form. So, Pinar, do you take the bet or not? And when would you switch? So, do you gain 0 for sure or 5% chance of getting 100? Which one do you take? For sure or the probability one?
Second probability.
Probability, it's easy, right? But then, as you go along, I mean, I only give 3 examples. This questionnaire, if you'll see the one that I send you, has 50 questions. And the question is, when do you switch from one to another? I don't know how many of you know anything about prospect theory, but the switch is where really our interest is. So is Diego and Pinar, do they switch in the same place? Are they willing to take the sure bet, like do they take the 10 for sure, or the 5% of gaining 100? And the same, you can reverse it. So Pinar, what do you take? You lose 0 for sure, or you take the chance of losing 100, 5% of losing 100? It's a tough one, I know.
I would go with the second one, I guess.
You take the 5% chance of losing 100. I'm surprised. You won't take the for sure not losing. Huh? You're a risk taker. There you go. You are. Luckily, Russia is gone, but you might be qualified to be a pilot. We just need to work on eyesight and a few hands, whatever coordination. I don't know, to test them, I mean. But you might be qualified for a pilot. So this is one of the most common tools to evaluate risk-taking. There's a good reason why we have used money and not other forms. Money for me and money for you, for all intended purposes, it's the same currency. I know a dollar, I know a pound, you know a pound. What you feel about chocolate or something else, you might not like chocolate. Everybody likes money because it's a metaphor. It's sort of a metaphor or whatever. It's a symbolic thing for something else. And it's very easy for somebody, me or people here came from different cultures. You might not have encountered chocolate or whatever it is, the commodity. So how I perceive something and you perceive something with money, we have a common ground. There's a roughly similar value. It's easy to guess this.
I'm not sure. I think the utility of money depends on how much money you have already.
No doubt. No doubt. That's given.
Yeah.
Yes. It's not that it's without issues.
Yeah.
But more or less, a pound, you know what is a pound, you know the value of a pound. It's easy for you to exchange it. The money is given typically not because you want the money, because the money is exchangeable for something else. And needless to say, if you Bill Gates and you get a pound, first I wouldn't mind if Bill Gates came to my experience. I mean, it will be interesting by itself. But typically, this segment of the population we know nothing about because there are some mysterious. But generally, it's easy to manipulate. We know what's a pound versus 2 pounds. It's hard to know what is 1 cup of water versus 2 cups of water or whatever other commodity you have. So money has been the most ubiquitous measure. The second measure is just asking you, are you a risk taker? Joanna?
I was thinking that it depends on the time of your life. If it would be before, it would be more. No.
Now you're less. So I'm asking you now, where would you place yourself? 1 to 10? 5. Now, does that indicative of what a risk taker Joanna is? Or what? Yes?
Yeah, perhaps there is like social desirability involved and she doesn't want to show that she is a very high risk taker in public. So the answer might not reflect her underlying attitude.
Obviously, I put Joanna on the spot, and this is not her answer 5 might correspond to her perception of her risk taking. It's true. It might not. She might give us 5 because she wants to be just neutral for the discussion. But there have been studies using some other measures, and they found out that this was the best measure on this particular studies looking at smoking, drinking, use of seatbelt. So why do we need all the gamble when all I can do is, are you a risk taker, yes or no? It's simple, there's nothing into it. But people lie, people can give you 10-1. There are various problems there as well. So the question is how valid those tools are. This is the measure that we're going to use later on, so I'm not going to discuss that. Also, what Joanna nicely indicated, there are shifts in life. And I will touch upon some of those issues very briefly. This is a tool, it's called the Dospert. I sent it to you. This one looks not only in one domain, it looks in different domains. So it asks you about your, are you a risk taker? How likely are you to engage in certain risks? Not in just financial domains, but it asks you in other domains such as recreational. David, do you go water rafting? How likely are you to go?
I don't go water rafting, but do things in water.
Okay, would you be willing? I mean, yeah. So you might score high on this propensity to take this kind of risk.
Yeah, but why are you equating them? They're different things. Going water rafting or smoking. They're not perceived as risks necessarily
by everybody. So I'll get to this point in a second. So I completely agree that what's missing about the money and are you a risk taker is partially the perception of what do you think? Is it actually risky at all this activity? Right? This is what you imply.
Yeah.
Because the question is, to some degree, is what is driving. By the way, I didn't pay her to ask me this question or to make this comment, but this is alluding to the next slide.
But you owe me.
I owe you. I owe you anyway. But what we want to understand is not only if you are a risk taker or not, but what is driving your risk taking, right? Why? Just a second. So this is just another tool, but what we are interested is to some degree in the mechanism. Prospect theory allows you to do some computational models that captures maybe some inclination. This is just a quote about people perception of, you would think that Sidney Crawford at the time when this thing was one of the most famous models. Why could it not be so brave? Why is it risky to take a picture of your back, right? It doesn't seem, but this is precisely it. It's a perception. So none of the tools that I presented so far, aside from one, the Dospert, actually looks at the perception. And there's been a lot of discussion about how should we actually try to understand. And what the Dospert does, and some individuals have argued, is that we have to ask individuals, when you think about smoking, Jack, what benefit do you think there will be in smoking?
Pretty cool.
Pretty high.
No, yeah, it's pretty cool.
Pretty cool. How much risk is there in it?
Quite a lot of risk.
Quite a lot. It's not a good example, but in general. No, it's actually a very good example. Because what's differentiated between individuals is not necessarily the perception of risk, but it's the perception of benefit. So, just a second. So when Jack, the difference, assuming that Jack smokes, the difference between me and Jack, with our propensity to take the smoking risk, is not a difference in the risk perception, it's a difference in the benefit. So he's willing to engage in this risk because he thinks, God, there's so much fun in smoking, in jumping, in investing. Whatever it is, the person who's engaging in that thinks that there's a lot of benefit.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand. So when you say risk related to smoking, do you necessarily mean like lung cancer or something dramatic? Because it is
I think lung cancer is pretty dramatic.
Yeah. That's what I said.
Yeah.
Or something along these lines. But because it is clear that smoking is bad. It's not like it's maybe yes, maybe no.
Yeah.
So.
But there are first you might think that it's not risky. There might be an objective risk out there, but in many cases, not only there's not objective risk, but people discount the objective risk and have a subjective feeling about what is the risk. So if you ask individuals about the risk of smoking, they might be accurate or they might be completely inaccurate. So I'll give you an example. Think about nuclear facilities. If you ask people how risky is nuclear facility, people tend to give a very high rating of the risk of nuclear facilities, but the actual risk is very, very minimal. But people object to that. They go, at least in the US, there were many demonstrations. There were in Germany, etc. So it's not just an objective number that people give. This is.
Oh my God.
No, by the way, I'm not trying to question whether nuclear facilities should be or should not be operating. I'm not judging, but this is what is driving it. And if you look at throughout life, many of the things that people object to or in favor, it's because of their perception, not necessarily because of the objective numbers, if objective number actually exists. So, but this is the challenge. How do we, convey this objective? This is where artists might come into place. How do you actually convey risk information? Do you just say, I have 2 more minutes. Okay. 2 more minutes.
That is risk.
No, it started 50. If you would have come on time, just a few issues that actually are problematic for our research. Age. When you're 15 or 80, you might do a completely different things. And that might invalidate some of the measures. So if I ask you about bungee jumping, maybe 80 years old don't do bungee jumping that often. But they might take other kinds of risks. So how do you compare 80 years old to 20 years old? And what happens in between? How do you evaluate that? How do you measure that? So those are the issues that culture. There are various aspects with regard to culture. Some culture value risk, some disvalue risk. Some think about one thing that is risky, others not. So these are just gender. There are gender issues, gender differences that one might take into account. There are genetic factors, biological factors, emotional factors that play in. And finally, there is the iPhone. And that's it. Questions? Yes?
You said that measuring risk-taking by just asking people how you see yourself as a risk-taker is a good way of measuring, right?
Yes.
I'm wondering why is it a good way of measuring? Because in subjective measures like this, there's always risk to people coming up with the social desirability results, but maybe risk-taking is one of the personality characteristics that we are so self-aware about it. Maybe.
I said that this measure was good in one study that I know. There are some studies that use self-measures like that, and it doesn't come so good. That there are other measures. And Christopher mentioned this social desirability. There are issues with that. And the question is, what kind of tool do you develop that will be able to answer this question? So now, from this brief demonstration, you see why the army is having difficulties and why in Dr. Strangelove you might end up with a commander that has gone berserk, or that is a really high risk taker, because it is a major challenge in finding the right tools to evaluate it. Like creativity, there's really parallels there. It's not precisely the same, but it's really parallel. When you come to the, how do you measure that? Is this the right tool?
Can measurements of risk in different domains predict potential risk taking in other domains? Because I might really want to risk money to win money, but I wouldn't risk my life necessarily. Yeah. So, can measures, is risk taking domain specific?
Yes. The answer, according to me, yes. It is domain in the sense that people tend to engage in risk in certain domains, and there might not be a general tendency to be risk takers. So we did some study of that. I can show you some information if you like. Just one more last question, because I think that you said something before. Said yes, Thomas. Sorry.
So is it just one variable risk-taking, or could you maybe I was thinking of that because of, for example, whitewater rafting. I don't consider that to be risky at all. There's so many safety precautions. However, there's a trade in it. So maybe trade-taking is in some sense independent from risk-taking that you would do in a bet.
But I think that's the same question that David raised. Yeah, that it is domain-specific. Now, the fact that you don't think that...
It's not just about it being domain-specific. It's maybe that there are independent variables.
I agree. There might be independent from one another. And by the way, the fact that you don't think that whitewater rafting is risk-taking doesn't mean that I don't think that it's risk-taking. But this is the question. How do we evaluate this propensity?
My question is that the risk-taking measurement corresponding to perception what is risky. Like this kind of...
It is. So using this interaction between the perception of the risk and the perception of the benefit, together you can understand risk-taking propensity. So to evaluate, in other words, you might need to evaluate both to better understand. But I think the time is up, or...
How much is social consequence?
Again, there are many aspects that one can ask about it. But the point is, again, it's a challenge. And for us as researchers to find means to actually evaluate that and to find methods to actually study risk-taking that will be good enough for us to do those things, and to see which one of you, when you are flying to Mars to meet those aliens, would not press the either eject button beforehand or not do a reverse. You know, in the flight there is room for so many. So we want to make sure that those who go meet the aliens actually will make it. So.
First, I have to say it's always a bit annoying to speak after someone who speaks so perfectly with so many slides, and now I really don't know what to say and I want to go. But it was an excellent talk and you're a brilliant speaker, so now I hope I'm not going to bore you with this philosophy and with not so many arts around it. I'll do my best. So usually, I think you all know Catherine, and then you might know what sort of work I'm doing as well. Because usually when people ask me or ask what sort of research is Sylvia doing, then they say, well, she's doing work on pushing fat men off bridges. She's doing work on smothering a baby to save soldiers from war. So all these sort of things that might sound funny at first glance come from, would you have ever guessed it, philosophy, and they are moral judgments. And I want to just tell you first a bit more about what are moral judgments, what's the sort of philosophy behind it, and then what's the problem? Why is it difficult to measure them? And then I want to introduce this virtual reality. I think some people have been, I think it was 2 years ago, where Sylvia Pan from UCL was giving a talk on virtual reality. And today you will also see my virtual reality lab. I'm being filmed. You'll also see my virtual reality lab. And then you can sort of experience how maybe difficult research questions you can study in a more sort of virtual environment. And I'm also really open if some people want to use the equipment, that you can then contact me. Maybe there's some idea that comes to your head. Of course, it's not moral judgment. but which is something else where you might want to use virtual reality. So it shall be interesting when you see my lab, and then you can see some sort of idea you might have. Right. There we go. So first of all, I want to just say, because all we have this idea moral judgment is pushing the fat man, but let me tell you what is moral judgment. So moral judgment actually comes from philosophy, moral philosophy, and from law. So people were actually wondering what is good and bad, what should be the law, what should be criminal and what shouldn't be criminal. So an example is obviously mostly killing, that's a criminal act. So philosophers have decided in many countries killing is wrong. But killing is not always wrong, is it? So philosophers think what constitutes of people, why do they think something is morally wrong and something is not? So for instance, when we talk about smoking, we all think smoking is sort of wrong, but it's not morally wrong, is it? So somehow people seem to realize, philosophers seem to realize, seem to think, what is the moral difference, what is key morally good and bad, and what is maybe just customs. So the basic questions actually do come from law and philosophy, and always the answer behind is, what should be the law, who should be prosecuted? And then this example of the fat man makes sense, because if somebody pushed the fat man, but he did that because he wanted to save 5, should he go to prison then? Who thinks he should go to prison then? Why do you think that?
Because it's murder, but nonetheless, you can't have blurred lines and that sort of thing.
But you said I did that to save the 5, and say it did.
Then good for the 5 people, but he still committed murder.
Well, how is it in the court of law, do you think?
Maybe you would, like a less manslaughter, or I don't know, but not like first-degree murder.
Yeah. Would you sort of think this is a very brave man if he did that? Who would think he was a very brave man? See, now, lots of people say, yes, he would be a very brave man. I mean, not the fat man, the one who was pushing him, yeah? So now you all say it's a very brave man. Isn't that strange? Because if I would have asked you, is it morally acceptable to push the fat man to save 5? Lots of you would have said no. But actually, if I ask the question differently, if I say what should be the law, which is what the actual morality is about, what should be the law, you would sort of consider then pushing the fat man, right? So let me just get the examples on here. Why? I mean, you all know it. Who doesn't know this dilemma? So you all know this. It's called, this is an impersonal dilemma, where sort of the action is something, flipping a switch, killing 1 instead of 5. Now, if you just simply ask that in a survey, and that's why I think people get it wrong, lots of psychologists, they sort of ask, would you do it? Or they ask, is it appropriate? And then lots of people say yes here, but in the fat man scenario, they say no. But you already saw what happened. If I just rephrase the question a bit, if I just said, if someone had pushed the fat man and it saved, in order to save people, and yes, it saved people, lots of people would say that was a positive act. Yeah.
Actually, it's important to know that you can't jump yourself, because otherwise you would actually, because you're not heavy enough, that's part of it.
Yeah, you think, yeah. But so the large problem is here though, because usually when I give this talk at conferences, and then they have never heard about this, and then I say I'm doing morality, and this is a fat man on the bridge, and the train is approaching, and they're all laughing. I mean, they say, what's this crap thing are you doing? Because they don't see, if I talk to psychologists, they think this is horrendous I'm doing that. Fat man stopping a train. So the problem is, because the scenarios taken out of philosophy with a different background brought into psychology, and that's a problem. Because philosophers are actually not interested in, is this scenario real? Would you personally do it? Actually, what they want to know is, should there be a law that someone should not be prosecuted for murder if he was doing something as means to save others. So I think all the research that use it in the traditional way, say, is it appropriate? Participants just simply don't understand that. If you ask me that and you say, is it appropriate? The only thing I think about is, would I do it? I think, no, I wouldn't do it, so I say it's wrong. So we need some sort of other way of measuring it. And I myself conducted an experiment which I think nicely demonstrates also how wrong people get this question, would you do it? Because that's not what philosophers really want to know. So that is, so if anyone was interested in this topic, I mean, why would you? But say, this is a popular science book called Would You Kill the Fat Man? So if anyone was interested in, say, philosophy, I mean, why would you? But again, this is a book you can read in bed, it's quite fun, and it's philosophy, so yeah, just advertising this book, really. A friend of mine published that. So the dispute is from moral philosophy, taking it into psychology or into research. And I just want to show you one experiment I did here in Plymouth, which was quite cool, where I sort of demonstrated this dispute. So I gave participants a placebo pill. So there were two groups and everyone received a placebo pill, right? And to one group, they received the placebo and I said to them, this is a drug that enhances your concentration. It doesn't affect your moral judgments, but we're going to look at moral judgment. It doesn't do anything, just enhance your concentration. The second group, and remind you, they also got a placebo, but I said, this is oxytocin. And oxytocin, I said, is a drug that makes you more moral. I didn't say more, I just said it makes you more moral. But it doesn't affect your concentration. And then they did a concentration test and they did the moral judgments. So first, the group where I said it enhances your concentration, they concentrated better. Now, what about the group where I said the placebo, it wasn't a placebo, so but I said it's a drug that makes you more moral. What do you think they did? Who think they pushed the fat man? You all think that didn't push the fat man? Who think that didn't push the fat man? What was the rest? I mean, one thing, you think nothing changed or what?
I don't know.
I don't know.
Yeah.
So interestingly, and that is the results here. Bottom is the placebo effect strength. The stronger they believed the placebo was a real drug. Top is the moral acceptability rating, showing, and also I showed it was two means, the stronger they believed the placebo was a drug, the more likely they were to push the fat man. So they must have thought that that was the more moral choice. And that is the sort of same thing then I've just done with you, because in the abstract, people do think maybe pushing the fat man is the more moral choice. They just don't understand the question. Oh, right. And that is, so that is that. So we need to get away from that. And then we need to see what is actually, what are psychologists interested in? Psychologists are actually, philosophers are interested in what should be law, what would you do, etc. Psychologists are more interested in sort of how do people make moral judgments? What actually would they do? Would they actually push the fat man? And that's why the scenario looks so ridiculous. But they would maybe want to know, a person in an actual dilemma situation, you know, they have to quickly make a decision, what do they do? That's what mostly psychologists want to know. And we can't assess that with a fat man scenario. And also here you can see another big problem, because you might have scenarios where you want to test if there was an emergency and one got shot, does the participant shoot the other? Well, you can't test that in real life, and that's sort of the questions I look at, like, would you rather shoot a black or a white person? You can't test that in real life, so therefore I look into virtual reality. So all these scenarios in asking people blah 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 that has all got low ecological validity, and we need to have improved testing, and that is virtual reality, I think. And here you can see me, this is me, in London, that's an empty room, there's nothing there. And all this, when you think I'm leaning at the bar, that's all not there, that's all just projected. So it's an empty room and the computer screen is projected on the wall, on all the walls. And I'm wearing glasses, and the glasses are 3D, and the glasses also have head tracking. So as soon as I move there, the scene goes with me, so it never looks odd. And here you can see avatars, so that is the real person here, and that's avatars. So you can see that same height as the real person, and they interact with the person, so they look fantastically real. And I've done that also. This guy is quite nice. I mean, I talked to him in VR, and you know, he said hello, I said hello, and then he said, are you a football fan? I said, no, I'm not. Then he said, oh, never mind. You know, so that interact, so you can really, so there's high as you standing there and you chat with them, so you can feel quite closely related to them. And therefore, this sort of immersive aspect, that's the aspect that is sort of when you move your head, the scene is not gone. And the aspect that they're human size is better than any computer game or 3D cinema. It makes a true illusion of reality. It's great. Now here in Plymouth at the moment, and that's what you will see, is I'm using the Oculus Rift, that's this thing, and you can all wear it this afternoon, and you can all have the illusion of the virtual reality, and one of you can also do an experiment about more judgment in that. And here you can see with the Oculus Rift, what it does is that gives you 110 degrees field of view. So that means, and that's why I ask you what I'll ask you to do when you come to my lab. If you wear it, look up, you'll see sky, look down, you look down, side, you can turn around, you see the back of the scene. So compared to, let's say, a 3D cinema, you look left and it's gone because it's a steady image. This thing, you really have to look all around and the scene goes with you. So that's why I think it's particularly suitable if you're studying sort of difficult issues, aggression, empathy, shooting, these kind of things. Then, yeah, I'm interested in that, and we can come together and maybe do it in virtual reality. Thank you.
How many Oculus Rifts do you have in your display? I'm wondering whether you can do interactive experiments involving multiple people.
Yeah, you can, but again, that involves a lot of computer science though. I mean, you can do a lot with Oculus Rift. You can have work gloves and see your hands in it. And, but for all of this, you need some. That's a bit of a disadvantage because compared to the standard experiments, you know, I can change them, etc. But with those, you need a lot of programming to change a tiny bit. But yeah, you can potentially have players interact, which might be quite interesting for some economic games or something. Yeah. Oh, any more questions? Yeah.
Sure. Have you got any way of making people think of the consequences of their decisions are real? Because, I mean, the thing that always strikes me about the moral decisions experiments, and the reason why they have low ecological validity isn't really to do with how immersive the experience is or how rich the visual information is to do with the fact that they know that their choices are real. And I will always tell you that I'm a moral person, and then behind your back I will, you know, steal your money or whatever. So, are there ways of setting this up so that people believe that these things are real?
Yeah, that's what the virtual reality should deliver, that they believe that the situation is real. So for instance, what Sylvia said, from UCL, the other computer science Sylvia, said if you're afraid of public speaking, and then you put them in a virtual reality, people are afraid as well. If you, it's in avatars, need, people have them as well. So it seems that there's quite a bit of evidence that the way you behave in that is like how you behave for real.
Okay, I mean, it might make it a bit more convincing, but still, I mean, you're still making a very big assumption there about people, people buying into it and behaving in the virtual world. I mean, I might just think, you know, if I put on a headset, I know it's virtual reality, I might just think this is an opportunity to, I don't know, to be a good person. I know I can be a good person for once, and I'll give you the socially desirable answers. You know, if there was some kind of real cost, if these are real economic games where I'm actually able to take points from other players in immoral ways, which would then translate to more participant payment from me or something, maybe I'd do a different thing, I don't know.
But I know, but then in the economic games there's a problem as well, because you say take some points. I mean, there's also peanuts money. It's not like, it's never like...
Oh yeah, sure, I mean, you're going to make it meaningful, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm not saying this is perfect. I mean, best would be if we study it in real life, but I think it's a better way than, you know, the classical just reading it and imagining it. So, yeah.
It increases external validity.
Yeah, it increases. Obviously, it's not perfect, as I guess. Yeah. There's someone else who wanted to ask a question. Okay.
Hello. We're going to talk about. Hello. They've been here all day. Right, what we're going to talk about today are social dilemmas and how we can understand them. It's really sort of more about an experimental paradigm than solving any particular problem. So, first of all, what do I mean by a social dilemma? This gives light to the fact that you don't actually ever get anything from the workshop, because I did the present workshop and now I'm doing my first present presentation. That's the exception rather than the rule. Okay, so what is a social dilemma? So here's an example of a social dilemma. You've got twin children, and it's their birthday, and you bought them a lovely birthday cake, and you need to split this birthday cake between them such that both of the twins will be happy. There'll be no arguments about who's got the biggest slice of birthday cake. So has anyone got any suggestions about how you can do this? Yeah.
One does the slicing and one does the choice.
Oh yeah, you get the right answer at the first time.
Second K?
Huh? Second cake, yeah, I like that one answer. So we got the right answer there. Yes, the canonical solution. Huh? Experience. Yeah, the trouble is buying a second cake is, there's always one slightly bigger than the other. One's got more chocolate buttons or slices on the top. So the slicing solution was right.
You give them a risk-taking lecture.
And they don't want to eat.
Give them just a spoon?
That's it. That's all
No,
they're allowed.
just a spoon and cake.
Oh, just go for it. Just go for it.
Yeah.
Just dive in. Well, nice. So the choice is, as I say, is to make one of the twins the cutter and to make the other twin the chooser. And then we'll be perfectly happy. Because the cutter's got two possible strategies that they can adopt. The first is to cut into a big piece and a small piece. Or they can cut the cake as evenly as possible. But of course, the cutter, they know that the chooser's going to decide which bit they're eventually going to have. The chooser can either take the big piece or the small piece. Of course, all children like chocolate cake, so they'll just take the biggest piece. So the cutter, when making a decision about what she does, either evenly as possible or big piece or small piece, of course takes into account the behaviour of the chooser. So will, of course, cut the cake as evenly as they possibly can. They've got nothing to complain about then because they're the ones that cut the cake. So if they got a small piece, it's their own fault. So this is an example of a social dilemma. And we encounter social dilemmas all the time. Do we drop a piece of litter in the street? Do we carry it across to a bin? Do we hold the door open for someone? Do we let them slam it into their face? It's taking me time holding this door open. So social dilemmas happen all the time. So how do we understand them? So there's one guy who's particularly interested in things like this, in social dilemmas. A guy called John von Neumann. Anyone heard of him? Two of you? The most important, probably the biggest genius of the last century.
I think he was the model for Dr. Strangelove.
Yeah.
The real Dr.
This looks a bit like Dr. Strangelove. It's sinister then. So what did John von Neumann do that most of you have never heard of him? He invented mathematical set theory, which has tortured lots of school children across the world. Very important theory for mathematics. He was involved in quantum physics, early work in quantum physics.
He was one of the key people in development of nuclear weapons. He developed the first programmable computers in order to do the mathematics to create the first nuclear weapons. And in fact, his name is used to describe the architecture of computers that we use now, the von Neumann architecture. Now, he was also interested in parlour games. Now, anyone that came to the thing that we did last night from 6 o'clock will know that those are parlour games, strange games that people play together in each other's homes. Okay, that's what we did last night. It was quite apt. So he was very interested in parlour games, especially, parlour games were very, very popular in the 1920s, 1930s. So he was thinking, well, he was trying to look deeper into trying to understand, how people could win at these parlour games. We saw a lot of competition going on last night, so we can understand that. So in 1923, he wrote a book in German on the theory of parlour games, and he expanded that to the more well-known book in 1944, The Theory of Games and Economic Behaviour. And this really sort of spawned this idea, this area called game theory. Now, game theory is the study of conflict between thoughtful and deceitful opponents, so it's largely based around trying to fit it within the paradigm of games, really. But games as abstractions to human interaction. So what is it? It's a branch of applied mathematics, and it assumes rationality on the part of the players. It's very important. And this idea of game theory is really to find the optimum solution for any game. So let's go back to our cake splitting problem. Now, the cutter and the chooser have got two different game theoretic roles, and two sort of solution algorithms that we use. So this cutter's one is called the maxi-min, and what they're trying to do, if you sort of try to frame it in a more logical sense, is try to maximise the minimum amount of cake that they will get. And in economic and game theory sense, that's called maxi-min. This one's probably more well known. Minimax. The chooser here is trying to minimise the maximum amount of cake they can get. Okay? So that's minimax. Now, maxi-min and minimax are two economic theories of which basically nearly all economics, post-war economics, were built. Okay? Effectively trying to minimise the maximum losses that you could achieve in any economic scenario. Okay? So it's of course quite important. Largely abandoned in the sort of last big rush towards banking collapse we had recently. So, these algorithms can help us find the optimum solution for any game. Now, any game as in any zero-sum game, which is what the cake cutting game is. You can't get more cake at the end of the game than you have at the start. You're just dividing it up between the players. So every finite two-person zero-sum game has a minimax solution, and it's the saddle point between where the minimax meets and the maxi-min meet as well. We don't need to know that. So why is game theory interesting to us? To any of us, apart from economics. So it's relevant to economics, as you've seen, it's very important in economic warfare. It was used to try and understand the new concept of warfare without war that happened after the Second World War, when both of the opposing sides in the Cold War had these massive nuclear arsenals. How can you understand that? It's used in evolutionary biology, sociology, and social psychology. Where it becomes interesting. So here's a game. It's one of the most famous game theory games, developed by Flood and Drescher at the Rand Corporation. It's Flood and Drescher, called Prisoner's Dilemma. Anyone heard of this? Okay. Usually it's school children. Okay, Prisoner's Dilemma. For those of you who haven't heard of Prisoner's Dilemma, so a bank has been broken into, and the safe has been opened, and the police investigator has been brought in to try and understand, try and arrest the people involved in this. There he is. So, here's a mistake, always a mistake. Just think you can get away with these things with using new applications. Right, okay. So, he's been brought in to investigate the crime. So he looks at the CCTV coverage it's from inside the bank and realises this is a one-man job. And based on how the safe was opened, he knows there were two guys within the area that could have broken open the safe. So what he does is he gets his police constables to go door and raid on their house, brings them to the police station and puts them in different cells. Okay, prisoner A, prisoner B. Okay, the police constables, they turn over the house and they find equipment which could have been used to break open this safe. So they think, okay, so possession of this equipment is illegal, so the police constable's got something on them already. You can send them away for 6 months each, just based on the fact they have this equipment in their house. But he thinks, right, what I really want to do is get one of them to confess to the crime. Or not so much confess to the crime as Grass is made up and fit the other one up for the crime, to tell his mate that he did it. But he wants to avoid a scenario where both of them will grass each other up, because he knows based on the CCTV images that there can only be one person involved in the crime. So he gives them an ultimatum. He goes to each of them independently and says, okay, so I'll make you an offer. I can put you away now for 6 months, just based on the equipment we found in your houses. However, if you rat out your mate, you can walk free now. You walk free, your mate will go down for 10 years. Okay? However, if you both try and rat each other out, we know that one of you is lying, so we'll send you both down for 2 years for perjury. So he gives them this ultimatum, both of them independently, and then walks away and lets them think about it. So what would you do? Would you rat your friend out, or do you stay silent? So we'll do it now. We'll play a game of Prisoner's Dilemma. We're going to do a play for chocolate. So I want 2 volunteers to play Prisoner's Dilemma.
For chocolate?
Yeah, for chocolate. No, yeah.
Diego.
Okay, Diego, come on up. Anyone else? Okay. Ilaria, Diego.
It's chocolate.
It's chocolate.
Okay, so in game theory, we're not going to play. We're going to play for chocolate rather than prison sentences. In game theory, we have nice names for things rather than grass up or rat out your mate or stay silent. So cooperate is to basically cooperate with somebody. Defect is to try and get the maximum amount you can get. So you can see here how I'm going to split the chocolate up depending on what you did. So if you both cooperate, you're going to get 4 pieces of chocolate each. If one of you defects and the other one cooperates, then the defector will get 7 pieces of chocolate, and the cooperator will get none. Okay? If you both try and defect against each other, so you get 1 piece of chocolate each, and I get to eat the rest. Which is, to be honest, my favourite scenario. So how are we going to play this? You're going to put your backs to each other here. Move you across here. Okay, put this arm out, horizontal like this, with your thumb out, okay? Like that. Okay, so imagine you're Roman emperors during in the Colosseum. So when I say now, you're going to make a decision by, if you decide to cooperate, you're going to put your thumb up. Okay, if you decide to defect, you're going to put your thumb down. Okay, so are you ready? Are you deciding what you want to do? Don't do it yet, don't do it yet. Okay, ready, now. There you go, Ilaria. Lovely. I'm sure. Can't trust anyone. Now, if you remember, if you cast your mind back to the original definitions of game theory, then game theory assumes rationality on the part of players. So who do we think acted rationally in that scenario? Was it Ilaria or was it Diego?
Diego.
Diego acted rationally. Right. Right, okay, let's think about this rationally and make believe that we're logical beings and we go through logic. We're rational people, which most people assume that they are, but they're not. Okay, if we believe, if I was Ilaria and I believe that Diego is going to defect, what should I do? Defect. Does anyone believe that Ilaria should have cooperated? No, because if she cooperated, she would have got no chocolate, but if she defects, and she believes Diego would have defected, at least she gets a single piece of chocolate, yeah? Because we're always trying to maximise our chocolate intake, naturally. That's a given. Yes?
But the overall payout is bigger if both cooperate, basically.
That's irrelevant. We're talking about rational play here. As a rational
You mean
player.
self-interested player?
Yeah, because rational is that they should share chocolate.
Well, no, that is rationality. Okay, so rational players should always try and maximise their intake of any sort of resource, according to game theory. Right, okay, let's go back, rewind back. So, rationally, if I believe and I'm a rational player and I like chocolate, we could be playing for, imagine we were playing for £1 million. Imagine we were playing for life. Okay, for years of life or something. Really important decision. So, if I was an Aria and I believed that Diego is going to cooperate, what should I do, rationally speaking? Should I cooperate or defect?
Defect.
Defect? Does anyone think cooperate? Just be. So yes, you should defect if you think Diego is going to cooperate, because then you're going to get 7 pieces of chocolate rather than just 4. And imagine you never meet Diego again. Of course, you've got to stay with him for the next 3 years, so that's it. So maybe not the right decision, but imagine you never meet him before again, then it makes sense to play rationally. So that's it. So if the other player cooperates, you should defect. If the other player defects, you should also defect. So whatever you do in Prisoner's Dilemma, rationally speaking, logically speaking, you should always defect. Okay, this guy, John Nash, got the Nobel Prize for Economics for working this out. That's called the Nash equilibrium point. It's the game theory solution to non-zero-sum 2-player games. So that's a rational player. So what's interesting is that behaviourally, we see what we saw here in our little micro sample. There's about 50% of people in Prisoner's Dilemma, one-shot Prisoner's Dilemma, tend to cooperate. So what's interesting about game theory is not so much about the rationality, but trying to understand why they cooperate. Okay? Why do they diverge from rationality? And the good thing about these game theory type games is that game theory, all these very clever mathematicians and economists have worked out what rational people should do in these games. Okay, so it provides a benchmark grounded in rationality. It's always good to have some grounding. Okay? But games provide an excellent control setting to study social interactions, and we saw that last night. Yeah, people got really into playing of these games, and they become implicitly motivated to try and succeed and try and play these games. So you can learn a lot about how people interact in games. But what's really interesting is the jam between these 2 slices of bread. Okay, it's the what, the why, the where, and how of social interaction. So how and why and where do people deviate from rationality? And what can that tell us about how we interact socially? That's it. Questions?
Just the word rational. I mean, it's, I guess, yeah, for me it really is self-interested to the exclusion of, because for me, I mean, if my goal was to maximize happiness, which I think is my goal as a rational human being, but you know, if self-interested were the term I would use, it would make sense.
Yeah. You answered your own question. Yeah?
I know it's the same remark that when you move this from game theory, which is more of a mathematical framework, into a social experiment, then meaning of rationality changes, and I don't think it applies anymore.
Why does meaning of rationality change?
Because in the mathematical game, morality is excluded. There's no such thing as morality. You're looking exclusively as
this is a way to try and understand what does morality mean. It's just a word until you can describe it in some way. And this is a way to describe what morality is. What does morality? This is what Sylvia was talking about. What do you mean by morality? It changes from person to person, culture to culture. The advantage is that the game theory is grounded in the definition of rationality
in 2 different contexts. It changes its meaning. So
morality does, but rationality doesn't.
The same. No, I think
I disagree.
I'm pretty sure rationality changes meaning.
Rationality is logic, isn't it? How many changes?
How people react in this room, you can agree that they all react. Everybody has a very instinctive reaction. This is not what I mean by rationality.
That's not instinctively we don't act rationally.
I don't think you're going to be understood if you use rationality in that sense. in different contexts.
It's been used for 50 years in game theory, behavioural game theory.
I think the point you're trying to make is we try to maximise more than one thing. When it's just the game, there's only one thing we're trying to maximise. But in real life, like we've got friendships and we've got social interactions. So we're not just trying to maximise the amount of chocolate we get.
Okay, so imagine you met another player. So the way you usually do these game theory games is in a very pure way. Is that you don't actually ever meet the other player. You interact through a computer. You'll never meet again. You'll never ever meet.
Yeah.
And then you play like that. It's not if you're playing with your friends, of course, then of course they're not trying to. You've got to think of the continued relationship, the continued payoff you might have from that friendship. So all these things will.
You may also get some.
Because so far, as I understood it in purely mathematical terms, it's just some sort of optimization problem. You have a variable and you try to optimize the outcome.
Yeah.
And it's clear what happens because there's probability is computable. Whereas in the social context, if humans try to do probabilities, they actually suck at that. Especially we have lectures on Bayesian theories, and I see that we cannot do it. We have to write it, and then when we write it out, we would make rational decisions.
Yeah.
So, does that conflict with the definition of rationality?
No, it doesn't. Nothing changes the concept of rationality. Rationality is immutable. So what's interesting? What changes? So if you play game theory games with chimps, chimps act very rationally. They almost get to Nash equilibrium point things in games. Chimps are fantastic rational players. Humans, by default, will cooperate. Our impulse is to cooperate. We're cooperative animals.
So how is rationality defined?
Rationality is defined by logic.
So it's a rationality that retains the same definition, but the goal changes.
The behaviour changes, the rationality stays the same. So that's what's interesting, is the fact that the rationality is immutable. But what we're interested in is what the difference is between rational play and what we actually do. And trying to understand those differences, why we don't do that. Yes, Sylvia?
I was just thinking, do we actually, when the participant is faced with this dilemma, they don't know that the rational decision is to defect.
No.
So when they cooperate, that it doesn't mean that they're necessarily cooperating because they're nice.
No, it doesn't. They could be
Yeah.
cooperative because they don't want to be perceived as being nasty, or because they believe that the other person will cooperate as well. Don't forget, if they believe the other person is going to defect, yes, they might think, okay, maybe I'll give it a chance, and maybe the other person will be nice. I'll get that 4 pieces of chocolate for the cooperate.
An actual question then. Do you think, what happens if you present the Nash equilibrium point concept to participants, like before, after, do you think it would change?
Yes, it does change.
It does change their behavior.
If you tell people, if you instruct people about Nash equilibrium points, and in fact, if you compare economics students to humanities students, then economics students defect more often than humanities students.
I think one more question and then we
move
do a
on.
bit of game theory.
Yeah. So, Christopher?
Yeah, coming back to Thomas' point, I actually agree that irrationality and rationality are both not clearly defined. Because if you assume a model in which self-interest is the defining factor of rationality, then you're obviously right. But if you assume a model where the group's interest is the defining factor, then selfish behavior itself is not rational anymore, because you put it in a broader context and there are competing theories out there, and it's actually a big debate what rationality actually is.
No, I mean, game theory is defined on defining rationality as maximising individual reward.
I would disagree. It has.
No, that's game theory. That's the original, the statement of game theory. So you can say, and I gave a lecture in the pub only last week about this, that the social payoff for prisoner's dilemma is, of course, maximise if both people cooperate.
Yeah.
And socially speaking, and my take-home message from this was that chimps don't cooperate. Yeah, they're in conflict, and they get the 1-1 payoff effectively. We are cooperative species, so we get the 4-4 payoff for cooperation. Now that's why we'll never have a Planet of the Apes, because the chimps are screwing each other over. Where we have learnt by impulse to cooperate with each other. And that's why we're much more efficient and successful as a species. And that's it.
Thank you.